Hello and welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. This is Josh. I'm joined as always by Sam. We got a lot to get to from an eventful race at Monza. First off, though, Sam, how are you doing? How was your weekend? How did you enjoy the big race this weekend?
I'm doing great. We always it was a little bit of an up and down race, but we sure got a lot to talk about, especially at the end. So I'm excited to get to all of it.
Yeah, it felt like those first, 5, 10 laps was some of the best stuff we've seen at Monza in a while, and then the middle part really just kind of dulled out. You were just, thinking maybe something will happen with strategy to mix things up, but it looked pretty under control by the eventual winner, Max Verstappen. He wins in dominant fashion from pole position at Monza. In it was pretty much a classic Max drive, classic Max domination like you'd see back in 2023, at some points last year, 2022, and so on. In his 60 or so wins in his career, this one was a lot like the rest in that he just dominated the race all day, and it never really looked in doubt for Max and Red Bull.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this one reminded me a lot of Silverstone in that it sort of came out of nowhere a little bit. I mean, it never comes totally out of nowhere with Max, but we're so locked in on this McLaren title fight at the moment. And here comes Max. A few races ago, we thought, from his mouth, Max said he didn't think there's any chance they're going to win another race this year. And then he comes out and has, arguably the most dominating performance of the year, especially when you consider the car difference. So, just another spectacular weekend for Max. And, even on these weekends, or even on these seasons where he's not going to be a champion like this one, he still reminds us why he's probably the best driver in the sport still, and the best of his generation, in my opinion.
Yeah, like you said, he said earlier this season he didn't think they'd probably win one for the rest of the way. Um, and then to come out here and do what he did, it was definitely a great drive. But do you think this is something we'll see more of the rest of the season? Some more races like this for Max where he's fighting for wins. And is able to be up near the front, or is this kind of a Monza specific thing for both Red Bull and then also for McLaren, where it was pretty obvious this wasn't um, the best track for their car this weekend. They just didn't have the advantages that they had the rest of the way. But do you think it was more of a Monza thing or something with upgrades from Red Bull or upgrades from um, McLaren that didn't really work out the way that they were hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, I would say on the one level, it's certainly track dependent. But like I said, I never count out Max really anywhere. Monza is a very unique track compared to the rest of the calendar. Just from a speed perspective, obviously being the tempo of speed, is so different than like we just came from Hungary and Zandvoort, which are, very much they're shorter tracks and just a lot more curvature, I guess, and not as many long straights, certainly. And Monza's just a total 180 from that. So I think we could see Red Bull compete at a couple of select tracks last season, especially something like Las Vegas comes to mind, where we see a. It's not obviously one to Monza, but similarly high speed track. Maybe that's another kind of place that they could compete. I think week to week is still going to be the McLaren show as we've seen throughout the year, but I certainly wouldn't count out one or two more Max wins here down the stretch, and maybe that he's not going to win the title at this point, but maybe it throws a little bit of a wrench in one of the two favorites' plans coming down the stretch here.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a place like where we're going next week or next race, Baku. I mean, it's got the longest straight on the calendar, but the rest of the lap is really not. You don't want that straight line speed. You're looking for a lot more downforce, so it won't really be the same setup that we saw at a place like Monza. I mean, there are other places the rest of the way where some straight line speed would certainly help, but yeah, I would tend to lean that this is more of a Monza thing. Not to say that Max couldn't win another race this year, or somebody other from not on the McLarens could win a race this year. I think that's definitely still in play. Um, but yeah, this track was probably the worst for what you'd hope for as a McLaren fan or driver um, this season. And then if you're looking at setup wise, it seemed really good for the Red Bull. The Ferrari did okay. You would hope for a little bit more at their home race, but they had kind of the fastest top line speed, which helped them out a little bit. So yeah, I don't think that we're gonna see Max come out and dominate races the rest of the way. And we know this is a title fight between the two McLaren guys. It's Max isn't a factor in it anymore in the sense of him winning, but you're right, he is a factor in the sense that he can get in there and mix it up with the McLaren guys and um steal points away from those two. So yeah, I wouldn't say we're going to see this the rest of the way, but there are areas where Max could pop back up and really take a hold of a race again like he did this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said, Vegas was the only one that jumped out off the top of my head, but we really never know with Max. He could come out and win pretty much any given weekend, just if he can get even a little bit of help from the car. So, yeah, we'll see kind of how that develops the rest of the year. I don't know much more development left. They'll change some setup stuff week to week, but yeah, I think we're kind of in the same boat here. If there might be one more win in the bag, or maybe even two, but it's still McLaren dominance for the rest of the year.
Yeah, just a couple other quick things before we get to kind of the main meat of what came out of this race. But if you look at Max, he had the fastest fastest lap time ever at Monza this weekend. Um, it's weird because you see these videos of the car from the previous generation or other generations, and you think that thing just looks so much faster, but this car keeps setting record lap times at these tracks, even with its deficiencies and all that, and it just doesn't really quite look as fast if you look compared to say like the Mercedes 2020 car that was just as fast as it was, as dominant as it was, and seemed like it could take corners flat out that shouldn't be taken flat out. Um, but this car keeps setting fastest record times, so I find that interesting, even if it doesn't look it. And then it was also the fastest race in F1 history, beating out the previous winner by a minute. Michael Schumacher held the previous record. um, and yeah, it was just um, it was a fascinating race in that sense because I feel like you usually get some things happen at Monza that you get a safety car or two, especially with turn one the way that it is, um, especially at the beginning of the race too. Um, you'd think that something would have happened that would have slowed it down just a little bit, but that race flew by. So that was another thing that was interesting from the weekend, with Max kind of setting a couple more records here.
Yeah, I mean, it really is one of a kind. That a fastest lap in F1 history. Certainly, I guess I don't know why it caught me off guard because it's Monza. I think we just think of all the great cars over the years, and it's a little bit surprising that in this Red Bull, someone set the fastest lap in F1 history, but it is Max Verstappen, of course. So,
Yeah.
yeah, a cool weekend nonetheless to see a few records get broken and uh, see some more excitement at Monza.
Yeah, that was just some other interesting tidbits from the weekend, but now we get into the main event from the race, which was late in the race, McLaren and their team orders decision. Lando, was in the lead at the time between the two McLarens, and I guess in the lead of the race because Max had pit and the McLarens were going long. But he pits from the lead. Um, he lets Oscar pit first because Oscar is 4 or 5 seconds back at that point, and there's a serious threat of an undercut from Leclerc to steal that third place away. So Lando and the team decide that it's best for Oscar to pit first. Don't let that undercut happen, and for the best of the team to get those maximum points. And then let Lando pit second, but with the stipulation that Lando comes out ahead because he's playing the team game in that sense. Lando has the slow pit stop, and then he comes out behind Oscar, and now you have a real predicament on your hands if you are the McLaren pit wall, because you have to make a decision on not sticking to your word, but sticking to, I guess, the plan that was just made, of Lando coming out, back in front, or do you not do that because the championship leader is ahead, and it'd be better for him to get those maximum points. There's a lot of things that had to go on there really quickly for McLaren to decide. Ultimately, they decide to tell Oscar to move out of the way and let Lando back through. And that's really where the heart of the conversation is coming from this race is, was that the right move? So I'll ask you first, do you think McLaren, made the right move there? Should they have swapped Lando and Oscar, in the fashion that they did at the end of the race with all the context around it, not just in this race, but for the championship as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I see where McLaren's coming from in the point of you don't want the team to be interfering between the two drivers here, even if it was unintentional. I mean, if you look online right now, you see Lando fans accusing McLaren of doing the botching the pit stop intentionally, and botching obviously the DNF he had recently, all kinds of sabotage and everything. And then you also see Oscar fans accusing McLaren of favoritism, letting Lando through here. And sometimes you'll get some shots of Zach Brown after an Oscar win, not looking as happy as he does after a Lando win. Um, uh, but the point is, there's a lot of drama, not necessarily within the team, but just around the team. A lot of speculation, a lot of it. No matter what you do here, you're gonna set a lot of people off, and I understand where their thought process is of not wanting the team to interfere here, even if it's unintentional. But by the same token, we want to see these guys race, and like Max Verstappen was basically saying when he got the radio message, that's part of racing is the slow pit stops, and sometimes that's going to happen, and it is what it is. So I think from a racing perspective, it's a little bit disappointing, but I also understand why they did it, I guess, and Oscar seemed to be mostly okay with it after the race and mostly understanding. And, I guess that's, what he would feel was just, the overall reaction after the race. It seemed like a lot more people wanted to see the race play out naturally and not see that switch. And, we're kind of disappointed in it from McLaren. So I'm definitely interested to get more perspective on that and hear what you have to say too.
Yeah. So usually I'm a very like anti team orders, let them race it out type of person. And that's usually my view on these things. And just because I would personally rather see, the pit crews, the engineers, the drivers all, fighting it out, whether you're on the same team or not. Um, in this specific case, I think um I I think it's a little bit different because of the fact that like it's different from the rest of the season, right? Where I feel like the two like engineering crews, both the sides, from top down have been going up against each other in pretty much a all out, everything's fair kind of way, as long as you don't run into each other on track. you could do whatever you want. And I've been fully for that. It felt like in this race there was a little bit of a different approach in that they were going to work together in the end, to secure like maximum points for the team. Just with the way that they approached it for Lando of, are you okay? Like it felt like Lando and McLaren both okayed the fact that Oscar could pit first to cover off the Ferrari threat, before, they allowed that to happen with the like notion in mind, and the just the thought in mind that they would come out ahead of Oscar, um despite being undercut, I guess, is how they were looking at it. Um, so to me, I think that it was in the end like the correct move based on how they approached it and how they went about it during the race of letting Lando back through. In a perfect world, if these two teams were fighting it out the whole race, mixing up their strategy, trying different things to one up each other, and then Lando had a slow pit stop, and then they said, "Okay, Oscar, get out of the way," because Lando had a slow pit stop. That would be completely unfair to Oscar to me. This makes this to me is a little bit different than that, because it seemed like throughout the race they were playing that game together, for maximum points. So I think it was actually the correct move to switch them. Like I said, in a perfect world, I would have rather had them both fighting it out all day against each other. I'd rather have Lando in that side of the garage not caring if Oscar gets overtaken by Leclerc, because that would get them the most points, in this championship battle, and really kind of bring them back into it. Um, I'd rather that be the outcome, but and how they approached it. But with how they approached it throughout the day and throughout the race, I think you have to, kind of abide by how you were going about things. And in this case, that would mean letting Lando, back through, and kind of restoring where they were before the pit stops.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of talk of it being compared to Hungary last year and being sort of a almost I don't know if the right word. It's not like a retribution or anything, but like a it kind of makes it even, I guess. And in that sense, I understand it because in both situations, the team sort of unintentionally put one driver over the other and wanted to restore order. So I think at the time I think I was pretty pro what they did in Hungary as far as I maybe it was a little different because it was Oscar's first win, but um, I just feel like it would be hypocritical to do a total 180 here and say that it wasn't appropriate. I mean, it still is a little frustrating as a racing fan, but also they did have the chance to fight it out after. The team
Mm-hmm.
said you have the chance to fight this out on track after, and Oscar had a few laps there to make a move, and he wasn't able to. So, with that being said, I think it's one of those things that I guess my like official position on it is like it's frustrating, but I understand. It's like kind of tough to we're explaining it to when you're explaining to people who aren't as don't watch as much F1. It's like how do you explain that, like, oh, they're just letting him by because it's fair or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just doesn't, like, it's kind of I don't know, in some ways it can leave a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth as someone who just wants to watch these guys duke it out on track and and let the chips fall where they may. But also, just given the situation, I understand it, and I think if this was Abu Dhabi, maybe things are different. Maybe they are forced to say, like, yeah, tough luck. It would be really unfair to have Oscar give up the championship for that. It would be equally unfair to Lando in a way, but my point is, Oscar still has a sizable lead in the championship. Lando did make up a little bit of ground, but he's still probably going to need some help, to to get past Oscar here, and it also didn't impact a race win either. Max was going to win the race either way. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Is it's a little frustrating to watch, um, but I also get why they did it, and both drivers seem to be relatively okay with it, and I think that's kind of the most important thing coming out of this weekend. If you're McLaren, is there's been so many times this year where things could have unraveled, and at least so far they haven't within the team, at least from the outside that we can see. So, I think it was a successful strategy in that sense, and they're going to keep being pretty neutral on this, I think, for as long as they can, or at least trying to seem as neutral as possible, even if fans on both sides kind of push different agendas.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part about it, right? Is that if this was Abu Dhabi, I don't think Lando and his side of the garage okay, um, Oscar going first in the first place, um, to undercut Leclerc, because if it's coming down to those points in the championship race, they're going to do what they have to do. I don't think Lando's going to play the team game in that sense in that specific moment. So I don't think we're even in this situation. If it's like if it is an Abu Dhabi situation, if this exact thing played out there, but also if we're in Abu Dhabi, Oscar and this happens, Oscar's not letting Lando by. He's not gonna, as much as they all say we're gonna play the team game, we're in it for for the team. We don't want to upset things within the team. When it comes down to that championship race, Oscar's not going to let him by. Like I just don't see that happening. So it's kind of one of those things where if this was a championship race, I don't think we're in this situation in the first place, and then I don't think the outcome is the same either from it. Which that's the frustrating part, is that I wish they raced all of the races like they were the championship race. In that and that's what I've been like commending them for all season, is that I feel like for the most part they have let them race it out like it's the championship race. Like, you know, like we said, other than the only rule is don't run into each other. Um, as long as you don't break that rule, you're fine to do whatever you want from a driver's perspective, from a strategy perspective, whatever it is. You're allowed to do that. And for some reason in this race, it feels like they went away from that. I don't know if it's because the championship lead grew exponentially in the last race, and they feel like they just don't have to maybe play that game as much anymore, or what changed. But this race definitely felt different than the rest of the season, and I wish they would have treated it the same, because if they did, we wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. Lando would have pit first. He would have presumably gotten a good pit stop out of it. And he would have come out ahead of Oscar, and then Oscar would have pit second, and it would have been close between him and Leclerc. I think Oscar probably would have got him in the end with better tires, anyways. So, like, if we go at it like it's a normal race weekend for McLaren this season, or like a final championship race situation, we're not in the situation to begin with. So I don't know why McLaren didn't treat it that way. I wish they would have, because then we wouldn't be having to have this kind of debate and conversation, from the Lando fans, from the Oscar fans, from everyone about what's what happened with that strategy call there at the end.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they're still close enough in the title fight that there's really no reason to treat it any different. And also, there's no, like we talked about many times this season, there's no challengers. Like there's no
Mm-hmm.
challengers for the drivers' championship. There's no challengers for the constructors, certainly.
Yeah,
So there's no reason to really cover off or protect for either driver.
yeah,
I guess I get like you want another podium or something, cover off Leclerc for the podium. Um, but like at the end of the day, if second and third versus second and fourth, it doesn't materially make that big of a difference. So again, the fact that they weren't going for a race win, and the fact that they have both championships secured essentially as a team, and they're still kind of overcomplicating things is certainly frustrating as a fan. Really, if you're a fan on either side of this title fight, or if you're just an F1 fan watching this and hoping for an entertaining title fight, I think they've done a pretty good job for the most part until this point. We've talked about that before. They've tried to treat both guys fairly, I think, in our opinion, for the most part, but they did kind of mangle this one a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I understand why they made the final decision, but if they made the car better at the start, maybe we're not in this situation at all.
Yeah, like we said, I think that the final outcome was the correct one for the specific situation that they put themselves in this race. Um, just with how they were playing it. They were playing it as a team game where they haven't done that, really all season. And when you play that team game and you make those kind of promises to your drivers, you put yourself in that situation as a team where you have to follow through with that, or else, your guy's going to be pretty upset. He's not going to be happy with, essentially, taking that risk for the team and then not getting the reward when he was told he would. Like Lando was in this situation, I think he would have been pretty livid because he was, the better driver all day and for most of the weekend. So in that sense, it wouldn't have been fair. But I think what at least I'm looking for is, yes, they made the correct call in the end in this situation, but they shouldn't have to put themselves in that position in the first place. With how they went about the race with team orders. Um and that's the other thing too, is I get it in the sense that F1 is different than any other racing series with team orders. NASCAR, IndyCar, whatever it is, yes, there's teams and there's teammates, but there's no real team battle because all those teams have a different amount of cars per team. They just have there's no real championship fight if you're looking for like Joe Gibbs versus Hendrick like battle, or versus Penske, or in IndyCar a Penske versus Andretti versus um, Chip Ganassi battle. That just doesn't exist really. Um, so it's different that you have to play that team game. Now, granted, like we said before, you don't really have to play that team game when you're up about 400 points in the championship with 8 races left. Um, you don't really have to play that team game then. So it is different in this situation. But F1 as a whole, just you put yourself in this tricky situation because of just the nature of um, the way that the series is run when you compare it to other series around the globe. So I get it in that sense, but like we said, you just don't have to do that in this situation because of how much you are up in the championship, and how you've treated the rest of the season. You've treated it like it's a head-to-head battle, and all bets are off. So it was just kind of dumbfounding the way that they handled this race differently than everything else. But um, in the end, with how they handled it, I think they made the right call. And I think what we're saying is we wish they would have handled it differently from the get go, um, and we wouldn't be in this situation at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I mentioned earlier about finding it frustrating as a racing fan, because this is something that you never see in another one of those series like NASCAR. You never see a team orders over a botched pit stop or really anything else. I
Mm-hmm.
guess obviously there's strategy in NASCAR, but it's totally different, and it's much more just the attitude out there. Even though it's softened up in the last decade or two, it's very different from what it is in F1. Um, and we like seeing that. We like seeing guys, you know, go all out and lay it all out there. And sometimes luck isn't going to go your way, and sometimes it will, and that's just the way it is. And when the teams kind of are uh, forcing the team orders and forcing guys to swap positions and everything. Maybe it's just us being Americans, but it just doesn't feel as natural to us. Doesn't feel like a proper way of competing. Um, but yeah, I mean, like we've already said a few times, I think it's the right decision. It just there's still something about it that just feels kind of off, even if it's the right thing to do in that specific instance.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to sum it up. Is it's frustrating, but um, the right call was made for given the circumstances. And, McLaren as a team is going to have to look back at this and um, figure out how they manage it going forward, because with 8 races left and the margin has opened up a little bit in the championship than it was 2 or 3 races ago, but there's still a championship battle to be had in the end. So, you can't play this game. You can't fall into this trap again the rest of the year, because I don't think the drivers are going to be as lenient in how they handled the situation as they were this time out. Um, and a little bit more with the McLaren strategy. Um, was it right for them to go long like they did in the end, to try and figure out something on Max? They went longer than just about anybody else out there and went from medium to soft one stop. um, to me, I think that's all McLaren could really do in this race, because um, Max obviously had them covered. Um, and it wasn't going to be a win if they straight up fought Red Bull. That just wasn't going to happen in the end. They had to try something. And I think they made the right call in that sense. That also probably led to what we were just talking about in the debacle they ended up having. Um, but if you're trying to win the race and maybe make something special happen, I could see why they went the way they did on that.
Yeah, I think, usually I have a pretty similar mindset when it comes to this. And even though we think McLaren is the fastest car, on average, I still kind of lean on the side of liking the call to go for it. I mean, you're going up against the best driver in the series who just set a fastest lap record in qualifying, and clearly has the pace on the weekend, even if they don't have it week to week of Red Bull at this point. So I don't really have an issue with trying something different here, with going for it. And if they run the same strategy as Max, clearly at that point they had already run qualifying and enough of the race to know that they were going to struggle to catch Max on pure pace. So I'm okay with this, as per usual, okay with trying something a little different. I know that it's not exactly one to one with some of the situations in the past. Usually we're talking about maybe a team that's slower, maybe a team that is sort of the underdog, trying a different strategy and going for it. In this instance, it's the team that's dominating the championship, but Max is a one-of-one driver, and the track just really lined up for him this. So I think once it became clear, they're not going to beat him straight up. You got to get a little creative, and I don't really have an issue in going longer than Red Bull did.
Yeah, I'm surprised that that's the other thing. Like, if this was a different race, any other race in the season, I think one of the two McLarens um, does something different than the other. Either Oscar pits earlier, puts on the hards, and does the traditional medium to hard like pretty much everybody else was doing out there, and tries to maybe jump Lando that way. Or, Lando does that and Lando stays out on the softs to try and jump Max, or vice versa. Oscar tries to stay out long to jump Max, and Lando, it jump Max and Lando, and then Lando pits earlier, to try and, I don't know, just cover off Oscar, and they think that's the fastest way to go about it. I feel like any other race this year, both those guys, the situation would have been different. I don't think both of those guys would have gone long and then gone to soft. Um, but I don't, I don't blame them for it. I think it was probably the only way that they were going to end up with a chance to win that race in the end was go long. Maybe there's a safety car, and then you either come out ahead after the safety car pit stop, or you're right there, but you're on a little bit better tires. Um, that's really the only way that they were going to win this race. So I think that was the call that they had to do in the end. Just with the pace that Max had there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on this one. Like I said, you got to try something different. Got to think outside the box, and uh, I mean, second and third really doesn't do anything for them at this point as far as team championship or anything like that. So going for it, giving themselves their best chance to win, I think it was absolutely worth it, even if it didn't end up working out.
Yeah, and now the championship is down to 31 points with 8 races left. Um, and it did feel like for a moment in that race that we could have a pretty, substantial flip in points. At one point, Lando was in first place early on, and Oscar had been overtaken by Leclerc. He was back and forth. And that would have been a fairly significant, change in margin in the championship if that's how it would have ended up. Um, Ultimately, Lando, there was no way that he was going to be able to hold on to the lead with the pace that Max had in that car. Um, with the just with how the slipstream works there, and then you add in DRS, and just the overall top speed of that Red Bull, I don't see how Lando would have been able to hold him off at all for the entirety of a race. And then that the Ferrari was okay, but I don't think that was possible for Leclerc to hold up Oscar for an entire race either. Although he did put up a pretty good fight in those first few laps to try and do so. Um, so it was looking like there might be a significant, change in margin there. But ultimately, it ends up being a 2-3 finish double podium for McLaren. But the gap only goes down 3 points for Lando. It's down to Lando needs to gain 3.8 points per race going in on average to get back to level in the championship. Um, did this week change your thoughts at all on the championship battle with how the race turned out? Lando gaining a little bit back, but not really a ton. Or are you kind of still in the same boat you were last week that uh, the championship battle's still on, but it's going to be tough sledding for Lando from here on?
No, I mean, I'm pretty much in the same spot as last week. I think, I mean, Orlando only gets 3 points in the end this week, and it ends up, like you said, he needs 3.8 points per race to close the gap. And the fact wrong then fair play, but I highly doubt Lando's going to finish ahead of Oscar. Every unfortunate mistakes or engine failure or something from Oscar. That's why I'm still in the same position of it's not Oscar is still a prohibitive favorite, and I really only all he needs is a couple more race wins and to not have some sort of engine failure or something, and I think he's in a very good spot here. So I think if Lando had won the race, even if Oscar had finished second, I think maybe I'd feel a little differently, not too much, but I think it would be a more positive weekend for Lando. Obviously, again, incredible Max performance. Sometimes there's not much you can do about that, but I think being second and third, you only make up 3 points. It's certainly not a negative weekend for Lando. Anytime he finishes ahead of Oscar from here on out, it's not a negative weekend. But he's going to need a little bit more coming up in Baku and Singapore and going on from there. So still pretty much in the same spot as last week as far as this title fight goes.
Yeah, I agree. I think this was the minimum that Lando could do this weekend and have it be considered a success. Only gaining 3 points, at this point you're going to take anything to gain some points back with the after the gap that was opened up last week. But yeah, you would have really preferred a 1-2, or when it looked like there was a chance that it was going to maybe possibly be a 1-4 there for a couple laps. You thought, okay, this could really bring things back together. But yeah, that just was never going to be the case with the pace of the guys around Lando. So, like I said, I think this was a minimum success for Lando, but he's going to need a lot more than this going forward. I know he gained 3 points, in the average you need to gain here on out is 3.8. So it's not, that far off that average that he needs to gain. Um, but just with how the points, payout works for a race, with the gap, being 7 points between first and second, and then three between second and third, and so on. Um, you're not going to get many more races, I think, where it's a 2, 3, 4 McLaren. One of those two guys, I think, is going to win the majority of the races here on in. So there's going to be some big points swings available for Lando if he could take advantage of it. Um, yeah, he's not just going to be able to, 3 point, 4 point, 5 point his way in. That's just not how it's going to work. With the way the points payout works and the cars that they're in, um, fighting up near, 1, 2. So, uh, minimum success this weekend for Lando, and doesn't really change my thoughts going forward. I still think the fight's on, but it's still a difficult one for Lando to overcome at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that winning in Baku is imperative for Lando. Unless we get that Oscar DNF, I think it's almost a must win um, for Lando. I mean, another 2-3 wouldn't be the end of the world. But if you win, you get at least 7 points edge on Oscar, and he needs to start making up that kind of ground to really feel like we're going to be in a title fight with 2 or 3 races to go. It's safe to say we're still in one right now, but if Oscar's able to extend his lead any further, or just hold serve for a few more races, then it's going to start to feel much, much further away for Lando.
Yeah, that's the thing is, this fight's still very much on, but it does feel like if Oscar goes out and wins next week and or next time out, in a couple weeks, and Lando finishes second, and it goes back up to 38 points, it was 7 races left. It just feels like if Oscar has a big weekend and Lando is not able to be there, and really battle him, or get a significant, a points gain or a minimum points loss. Even 7 points at this point feels like that gap would just open up, and it'd be pretty deflating for Lando at that point. It'd be, um, it still wouldn't be impossible to overcome, but then you're looking at, a race and a half sort of edge that Oscar has over you at that point with 7 races left. So, yeah, it's still very much on, but it's kind of teetering right on the edge at the moment of possibly going, very far out the window, if things go bad one more time for Lando. Um, Moving to our personal podiums, there were other drivers in this race other than just the McLarens. My first up was Max Verstappen. I know we touched on him a little bit, but that drive was just completely dominant and reminiscent of the 2023 Max. I know he's probably still putting in those 2023 drives pretty much every weekend, just with not the car that's going to give him the ultimate result in the end, but this one was just clearly dominant, from the pole to the entirety of the race. He just had it completely under control. Things looked a little squirrely at the beginning, with that start getting behind Lando, but in the end, the pace was just there, and he was not going to be beat on the day. Who was your number one for personal podium in Monza?
It's tough to really have anybody else up there this week. I mean, definitely the most deserving of the drivers on the actual podium to be on a personal. It's a stellar performance. We already mentioned the fastest lap record. Really something that it wasn't even on my mind, but it was really cool to be able to witness, and just a really stellar weekend all around. Pretty much a 10 out of 10 weekend there to uh, not come out of nowhere, but definitely surprise us a little bit. Being so stellar, especially in the race, being able to keep the McLaren so far behind him and build such a gap. So I've also got Max as my number one.
Yeah, I think that's the right call. In P2, I have Bortoleto. P8 continues to just put in great performances. What he's doing right now is really special. At the beginning of the year, I didn't think he would. I thought maybe the best we'd see out of him was a random showing in Q3 where he pops up and has a great performance there. Not really anything against him, just with how the car, how we predicted it to be at the beginning of the year. But now he's gotten to Q3, four of the last six races. And he's following that up with really good showings in the actual race as well. Bortoleto, he's on fire right now. It's going to be really hard when we get to the end of the season and have to rank all these rookies, and figure out who had the best season. But Bortoleto is definitely starting to put up a fight in that rookie of the year battle, not necessarily for points, but just in rookie of the year in terms of who you think has had the best rookie season.
Yeah, he's been really phenomenal. And I agree with you. It feels like all these rookies have been kind of up and down throughout the year. I think right now at the moment is between him and Isaac Hadjar. I think are my top two. I think pretty much all of them, or almost all of them, have shown flashes throughout the year. Have had some moments of brilliance, but I think those two have really stood out, especially being not on a top team or anything, coming in and really outperforming their car in numerous races throughout the year and outperforming their teammates as well. So um, he's been really fantastic.
I think
I've
I think Duhan's probably gonna win Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, him or Colapinto
Is
will be
Colapinto a rookie?
fighting
Are
for
are
it.
are we do we consider do like Lawson and Colapinto need a separate category?
I feel like they kind of do, but I think they
Yeah,
technically still count as rookies.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so they almost have like a handicap because I know Ollie did two races last year, but
yeah.
you
That's
know
different than
they
what
did
Lawson
like
and Colapinto did. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I have Bortoletto third, so I guess I'll just go ahead and mention that here since we already talked about him, so we don't talk about him again. But my second, I had Alex Albon finishing this race all the way up in seventh. Um, I mean, a little bit of it too is just kind of a recognition of what he's done recently. I know this is really a one race award, but I mean, just in this race coming from 14th to 7th, he technically gets out qualified by his teammate, but it's less than a tenth. They start on the grid right next to each other, and one storms up the field. Not necessarily, but Albon was kind of on their level here. And now out of five races where he's finished in the base seventh in the driver's standings, which in Williams, even in an improved Williams here, is still just kind of mind blowing. A Williams driver up there with the top teams, ahead of a Red Bull driver and a Mercedes driver at this point. So, yeah, I guess it's a little unfair because I'm adding in some accomplishments from other races, but it's just he's been so stellar lately, and felt like I had to recognize, not only that, but also a heck of a, I guess, kind of bounce back drive this weekend after not his best qualifying.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair to put him in here because of the season as a whole. I heard them say on the broadcast today, I didn't realize, or not today, this weekend. I didn't realize this that Albon and Sainz are tied in qualifying this year, and I was not expecting that. You look at the standings. Albon is seventh overall, 70 points. You got to go all the way down to 18th in the standings for Carlos with only 16 points on the season, tied with Behrman and the Haas, behind Bortoleto and the Sauber in points. I know that it's his first season at Williams, and there's been a lot of things that have gone wrong for Carlos this year that aren't really in his control. He's been involved in a few incidents, some mechanical stuff, just a lot of things haven't gone his way. Um, but it still has been, a pretty thorough, head-to-head teammate beating from Albon uh, versus Sainz this season, and then to hear that they're level on qualifying just kind of shows that. I guess it's a positive for Carlos in that the pace is there at some points, but he's just not getting the results in the races that Albon is. I'm sure that'll come. I still have a lot of faith in Carlos. I think he's a heck of a driver, but this season it has been a tough going for Carlos with Williams in his first year.
Yeah, I think the offseason dialogue around him and conversation, I think, is going to be more interesting maybe than any other driver. And I think next year, other than maybe Hamilton's a little bit different because of his stature, his history in the sport, and the fact that he's driving for Ferrari. But other than maybe him, I think Albon or Science, sorry, might be under more pressure than pretty much anyone next
Yeah.
season. Not even necessarily to beat Albon, but just to be a lot more competitive. Albon's clearly one of the best drivers, at least in my opinion, has been one of the best drivers this season.
Yeah.
And this certainly isn't the first time he's looked good. He's shown plenty of flashes throughout his career. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to be losing to Albon, especially being new to the team.
Mm.
But to be down by this much, even if he's had some bad luck at times, there's going to be a world of pressure on him. And it'll be interesting to see how he responds and how the dynamic of that team shifts in the offseason.
Yeah, I definitely expected it to be just a little bit closer in the championship standings between those two. Um, my third place is Isaac Hadjar. We mentioned him a little bit when we were talking about Bortoleto just in the rookie of the year kind of battle. But same as Bortoleto, I mentioned he's just on a heck of a run. Obviously, the podium last week, was a great performance, but starting in the pit lane this race in 19th. I guess you gain a free spot. Hulkenberg retires before the race even starts. So technically, I guess 18th, but still moving all the way up to P10 in a race that early on it was, not too difficult to pass in those first 5-10 laps. But, he was making up ground during that time, due to the pit lane start. So a lot of his passing came when the passing, got a little bit more difficult um, in the middle portion of the race, and also good strategy helps as well to move Hadjar up to P10. But another great drive from him. The qualifying wasn't the best from both of the racing bulls, but Hadjar is able to put in a great drive. And I feel like this is just kind of the new norm. I feel like he had a kind of summer lull. He got off to a hot start in the season, and now he's kind of back in full form. And um, watching him and Lawson compete the rest of the year, I think is going to be fun as well between those two guys at Racing Bulls. I think Lawson has gotten a little bit of a bad strategy situation in the last few races. Um, and I still think he's putting in pretty good pace in that car along with Hadjar.
Yeah, I think this is a classic of four guys for three spots kind of podium week because
Yeah.
Isaac absolutely deserves it as well. Coming all the way from the pit lane to points, like you said, very similar to Ollie Behrman. The week before, Ollie just got a little more luck, for lack of a term, with all the accidents in front of him. That was kind of turning into a demolition derby. Uh, but yeah, really a fantastic performance. Him and Leto, guys recently, and really been fantastic. I think too, it was probably a little cathartic for him to finish just ahead of Carlos. I know that uh, Hadjar was very upset after qualifying, felt that Carlos was kind of impeding him and cost him keeping his streak of getting out of Q1. Um, so, he finishes less than a second ahead of Carlos for that final point spot. Um, yeah, it's interesting to see kind of the driver dynamics across the midfield. Yeah, I saw a tweet that was saying, every feels like every driver in the midfield has like one guy who anytime something happens, they're like, oh, it's always that guy. That guy's
Yeah.
the worst. Like it's yeah, Sainz with Lawson, and I think Hadjar said that with Sainz, and
Hmm.
guy Alcon and Gasly have their own like well, I mean between them, but
Yeah.
also their own beefs with other people. Like there's always something interesting going on in the midfield, even if it doesn't get always captured in the broadcast. So, um, but yeah, another great performance from Isaac and very much deserving of a spot.
Yeah, speaking of the midfield, going to my stinker of the week is it's going to be Aston Martin. They looked good, in parts of the weekend, but when it came to the race, it was kind of a complete disaster for them. You get Lance Stroll caught up in a little bit of an incident. He ends up back in P18 ahead of Alonso, but that's only because Alonso had a suspension failure. He was battling up in, I think he had just gotten past Bortoletto. He was up in seventh maybe at the time. Was running a pretty decent race for the Aston Martin, squad, and then suspension failure, just going over a curb there. Takes him out of the race, ends up P19. So, it was not the weekend that I think Aston Martin would have wanted. And Alonso seemed pretty upset with the suspension failure as well. Just kind of like, what else is going to go wrong at this point, um, for Alonso and for that team. I think he's really waiting for next year, hoping that Newey can pull some magic out and he can get one more shot in the sun, another chance at possibly running after some race wins. And if the car is good enough, I still think Alonso could carry it to a championship, but that car is going to have to be really, really good for that to happen.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the same boat as you here, just because with Aston, it's been fascinating. It feels like since not necessarily since Newey's been on board, like especially the last few races, it feels like they've had moments. They've had practices where they look very quick.
Hmm.
Maybe like Alonso qualified very well this week, got into Q3. I think he qualified seventh or eighth. Um, so they've had their moments where they've shown big improvements from where they were earlier in the year, but they just seem like they can't put it together for a full weekend yet. And we know Alonso's very capable as a driver, and for as much as we all talk about Stroll, he's even with Alonso basically this year on points, and has had his moments as well. So, I don't think it's a driver thing. It's just it certainly wasn't this week, especially with the suspension failure. It's just been kind of a frustrating time for them, not being able to put it together for a full weekend, even when it looks like there might be signs of progress. Um, I think I'm gonna go with Aston Martin here as well. I think the only other guy I really considered was Yuki Tsunoda in this spot as well. Starting qualifying well, starting in a points position, and then finishing back in 13th. He has that incident with Lawson that was kind of both sides kind of blame each other. Classic incident. But it's just another frustrating weekend for him, and a week and it felt like maybe he can make some progress. And of course, you can say it's unfair when his teammate is Max, and maybe it is a little unfair to compare him to that. But Max is winning going away, and even without an incident, Yuki's kind of struggling to put it in the points. And so yeah, just I feel like he's kind of gotten off, not gotten off free, because I know he's under a lot of pressure, but he hasn't been talked about as much as some of the other guys, I think, at least considering how far off the pace he is at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Yuki is at some point, there's gonna be a discussion there, and I don't know if it's gonna be at the end of this season, if he's gonna get the call up for next year with new regulations, give him a shot, and see how long he lasts. The typical Red Bull way of see how long he lasts, and then if he can't make it, we'll make the change maybe mid season. of course, now with Mekis there, I don't know how much of those calls were Horner versus everyone else at Red Bull, or if it was, I don't know who was making those kind of um, quick decisions to get people in and out of those seats in the past. But yeah, I think Yuki is, the car hasn't been as good. For the most part, Max is putting in good drives, but still getting P3 to P5 on most weekends. So I wouldn't be expecting, Yuki to be, oh, he's P6, P7, like right there. Just because we know the car is difficult and it's going to take a little bit of time. But um, yeah, the whole second Red Bull seat thing it's such a tough conversation to have because you don't know you just don't know how to judge people based on that at this point with what we saw out of but it's just it's a cycle now with Perez with Lawson and then with Yuki it's how are you supposed to know you know how to judge someone based on their performances in that seat.
Yeah, and even Albon and Gasly as well,
Yeah,
dating back further, and even though that car was different, it's still same second seat struggles.
yeah,
Uh, I think I don't know. I mean, if he ends up getting another chance in F1, I could certainly see him succeeding. We've seen that Yuki has F1 level talent, over the course of his career, even if he's been inconsistent. Uh, but I think at this point, you look at what Isaac Hadjar's done this year, and I think it's hard not to make that call. They said they won't do it this year, and I wouldn't expect them to do it this year to make that change because there's really no reason to. I mean, even if you finish fourth, they're actually not that far behind Mercedes and Ferrari, incredibly in the constructors. But at this point, it might just be better to finish fourth and take that extra wind tunnel time uh, for next year. I know you lose out on some money if you finish lower, but um, and
yeah.
my point is,
I don't think they
I
care
don't think
about
it's
that.
worth.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think it's worth making the change at this point. I would ride out the season with Yuki, and then, but after that, not having the Honda partnership anymore, and just with his performance this year, if he was putting in respectable performances, that would be different. But he's just so far off the pace now. I think that it just makes sense to start next year with Hadjar, but we'll see. Maybe they'll give him a little more run and another opportunity in a new car, like you said.
yeah. It does start to look a little bleak when you look at the future with the Honda thing and um just his performances so far. I know you have to factor in the second car thing. But yeah, it does look a little bleak for Yuki's future at the moment. Just with Red Bull, I don't know if he'll get picked up somewhere else if he is dropped or what would happen there. But yeah, that's I think that's pretty much everything from this week.